Let's get started. 7:03, my goodness. Welcome everyone. My name is Karen Redman, I'm the Mayor of the town of Gawler. I'd like to welcome members of our community who have come out on this fairly brisk evening. Thank you for coming along. Council members, Deputy Mayor Shanks is going to be late and Councillor Solomon is going to be late as well. Council staff, welcome. I think David Barrett and Kirsty Dudley will take us through the presentation, but we'll get to that very shortly. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we meet on tonight is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. And I noticed that the Voice to Parliament was announced on the 14th of October, and it was announced in Elizabeth, which I thought was rather special. So this session has been convened for the purpose of discussing issues that involve boundary reform and to brief council members and the public, which is you guys down there, community members, on issues relating to their decision-making function. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions because those types of functions sit within a council meeting or a committee meeting. Members of our community, which is the 5 beautiful members that sit down the end of the corridor there, are encouraged to listen to the information. If you wish to ask a question, you can either text myself or text Helen Hennessy or whoever you have contact details for, and we will ask those questions on your behalf, if that's okay. And I'm sure you might have some questions that may pop up in your head as we go through. There is no set agenda and no minutes will be taken during this session. Mobile phones need to be turned to silent. Mine's on silent. If you need to take a phone call, please take it outside so it doesn't disrupt the session. There is no requirement for this session to be discussed in confidence, so I have not been advised that we will be going into confidence, so I think that's as it is. So without further ado, I might hand over to David and Kirsty. So David Barrett, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Kirsty, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mayor Redman. I'm David Barrett, Executive Manager, Committee and Strategy. You need to push the button.
Kirsty Dudley, Special Projects Officer.
And we're going to double team this presentation. So we've got a bit of a presentation plan in front of you now. We're going to go through a bit of the historical information and processes. I'll take care of that section. Then Kirsty will take us through the town of Gawler's pursuit of boundary reform, the legislative process guidelines and our proposal, and the stages and decisions through that proposal. We have a slide at the end for questions, but more than happy, as with all briefing sessions, for members to ask questions as we go along, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. If we can't, we'll take them on notice and get back to you as soon as we can.
Is the live stream on?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So, in terms of the history of boundary reform for the town of Gawler, it's interesting to note that the original Town of Gawler Strategic Plan in 1995 identified the need to review council boundaries. This presentation has been provided to members and will be loaded to the Elected Member Hub as well. It's very texty, so I'm not going to read it all out. You can read it at your leisure. However, these quotes are taken directly from that strategic plan, noting the desire to move into the north to encompass Hartness Heights, which is an area in Hewitt area. Also many residents looking to review areas to the north and to the east, such as Gawler East and those sorts of areas. So these are taken straight from that strategic plan document. We have a rough map that was in that strategic plan on the right-hand side, showing those arrows of where the intent was to move for Town of Gawler in its consideration of expanding growth. Note to the southern end, those arrows downward have occurred. That's the Evanston, Gardens, Evanston South, those sorts of areas. Oleana Waters and Aspire, so the bottom road there is Gordon Road, Tiver Road. So part of that plan was residential growth should occur to the north, not necessarily to the south, but that will require boundary change. Boundary change has been in each strategic and community plan since that first one developed in 1995. It's reflected in our current Gawler Community Plan 2030 plus and clearly reflected there in terms of our Goal 1, 1.3, promoting the government boundary alignments to reflect the township of Gawler's population with communities of interest. Further in skipping through, the key action in our identity around boundary realignment and making it very clear in our current strategic plan, our community plan, that the footprint of Gawler could realign to include areas adjacent that are seen part of the Gawler community already. It's also reflected in Goal 2 of our community plan in reference to the key actions around Concordia and the Concordia growth area being a very significant unzoned metropolitan fringe township. And as all members are aware, the state government have released that now essentially to be developed in the future. We're working with Concordia on a structure plan at the moment, but again reflecting the need to consider that as our growth area for Gawler. In terms of historical processes in South Australia around boundary reform, local government areas historically been established by towns and districts as they've been developed. I found it interesting to learn something new when I was doing this about the constitutional guarantee of the continuance of local government, which I found in the Constitution Act of 1934. However, the act that has actually stipulated how boundaries sit has always been under the Local Government Act. Now, local government boundaries underwent significant change in the mid-90s. There are a lot of district councils that were amalgamated into the larger councils as we now know them. Since that point in time, there has been little change in terms of council boundaries. And that's clearly because prior to January 2019, the only way to change your boundaries as a local government was for all impacted council areas to agree to that change. And that's clearly identified in the Local Government Act prior version, prior to 2019. So if council wanted to pursue boundary reform in accordance with our strategic plans, we would have had to have the buy-in from our neighbouring councils. Yes, Mayor?
How many councils under the previous legislation applied? I didn't think there were any. No, there were none.
There were no formal applications that we're aware of under the old legislation in terms of a boundary change. It was generally ministerial at that point in time. However, as we're aware, the Local Government Boundary Adjustment Amendment Act was passed through State Parliament in 2017, and it provided a new process for initiating and reviewing those proposals. And that meant that all councils could do it on their own. They didn't have to have the buy-in of all affected to make it happen. That Act removed that requirement, so coming into effect on 1 January 2019, so it took a little while from when it was assented in Parliament to actually coming into effect. It provided council with the opportunity to initiate a boundary proposal in its own right for the first time. Over to Kirsty for the process and guidelines.
Okay. So boundary reform is basically a process that's a legislative process. We can't just follow on our own method and make our own way through. We have to adhere to the guidelines and also address the Act as well as we go through. So initially there were 9 guidelines. There's now 10 guidelines which guide the process. The 10th was added so that a minister or the state government through the minister could initiate a proposal, because that previously had not been included in the initial Act. Our our journey through the boundary reform process has actually created some changes to the guidelines and the process. As we've gone through, we've questioned things, we've asked for clarity on things, and so Guideline 3 particularly got some changes around the consultation statements and also the process of council receiving a cost estimate and what processes followed after that changed so that council has some more legal support in that area and weren't just locked into an open contract. So you can see there the stages of initiating a proposal. A potential proposal can be initiated by either a individual or a council, and then the Commission basically take that potential proposal, assess it, and say whether they would like you to progress through to the next stage and look at progressing to the Stage 2 submission. And then the Commission will inquire and investigate that Stage 2 if they believe that you've addressed the Section 26 points and the guidelines as well. So after that, once the Commission have assessed it, they do their investigation, create a report, and that's then sent to the Minister. So we have two envisaged outcomes. This is a new process. No one's gone through the whole process of a general proposal before, and especially not a complex one. And so we envisaged two outcomes: a proclamation of yes, let's proceed with some boundary change, or no, the proposal's not supported and we won't continue. Our understanding is that the Minister, though, can choose to not fully adhere to the Commission's recommendations. They may choose alternative outcomes, ask the Commission for further information to inform the Minister's final decision, and also can request specified amendments to that report. If the Minister chooses to support the proposal, the boundary changes will be gazetted and the affected councils will be advised, and the unions and public will also be advised.
What are the guidelines?
So there's 10 guidelines accessible on the Department of Infrastructure and Transport's website. I don't actually have the list here, but basically they go through making a administrative proposal, a general proposal. There's one that steps you through the idea of doing boundary change. There is the investigation process is under one guideline. The community consultation that is undertaken by the Commission is also Guideline 9, I believe. Guideline 10 was the ministerial process as well. Yeah. So all 10 are available on the website for people to look at. There's a link from our website to that page as well.
There was one that you couldn't actually put in an application that would threaten another council's viability.
Yep, so that's actually in the Act. Yeah. That any submissions have to basically not affect another council's financial viability ongoing. So when we submit, we have to sort of try and identify and make sure that we're not going to make another council unviable through that process.
And we'll be touching on that viability issue in a later slide as well, so bear with us.
So this is just a graphic. Some people see visual things much better and take it in much better. It's just a graphic that is actually on the same website if you look at the Department of Infrastructure Boundaries Commission site, and that shows the process for the Commission, where they receive the proposal, they do that assessment process, they go through that inquiry stage, publish their report, and then make a determination with the Minister. So the Minister basically makes that determination. Or you present a proposal and it doesn't get approved to go through the process further on. So it just kind of steps out the different roles. It also shows where the Governor actually, if there is a determination that yes, we'll proceed, and there'll be a proclamation, then the Governor actually does that process. And it gets a report back to the Parliament about that.
Yeah, so is this the only thing that's in the legislation, is this process? Is there anything, because obviously there's a lot of technical details of, for example, do staff need to be transferred over when a move happens, and what are the financial details, and does the council need to buy, is there any actual process enshrined, or is it just the process for submission?
So since we actually provided our general proposal, the Commission has come up with a template for other councils to use to do their submissions. So they actually have gone through and made a template which says these are the things we want you to report back on in regards to what you're proposing. We didn't have that. We had to feel our way. Tara Shilabir and the team, this was before I came into doing this, they did a great job of pulling together what information they thought would be relevant. And from the 26 principles for boundary change, pretty much that guides what you need to provide the Commission for them to be able to make that decision. And so when they're talking about a council's viability ongoing, if you're going to look at a boundary change that might affect another council, you're expected to at least provide some very high-level analysis around what sort of impact you think that might have on their bottom line, whether they're still going to be viable, that sort of thing. So when we submitted our general proposal, it's further in the presentation, when we submitted our general proposal, we were asked for additional information for a few things, and that was to help with some of that more finer detail that wasn't really spelt out in the principles either. It was kind of alluded to, we provided what we thought they needed, they asked for a bit more information. But that's really, everyone's really just feeling their way, including the Commission, because it is such a new process. And as we go through, they are refining what they're doing at their end as well and how they're processing it.
I've got another question. This is from Louise. As I said, you can bring in your texts and we'll ask the questions. Has the Minister declined a proclamation in the past? I don't think, under this present system, I don't think that's occurred. But what about, do you know of any previous?
No.
No, not aware of any. Under this current process that was only enacted in 2019, no proposals have got to that final determination stage yet from a general proposal perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's been one administrative proposal that was very administrative and very easily lines on a map, very clear. That went through without any kind of issue, but
Thank you for the question, Louise.
And further to Councillor Davies' questions, there's no legislated process within determining what goes to who and how. That is what the inquiry stage is all about, to understand all of those things, which is why there's quite a hefty price tag on the inquiry, because it needs to do all of that analysis in terms of assets that would transfer over, what the growth requirement is, the redistribution of elected representations, all those sorts of elements, and what each council would be liable for in the event or not that it happened. So all of that is part of the inquiry process, and it's independently done. And the information, which we'll touch on a bit later as well, but the information must be provided from relevant councils, because the Commission has essentially public commission, commissioner rights in terms of public access to information. So any councils affected by the proposal cannot refuse to supply it. They must supply it by law under the Commission process. So that's all in that inquiry phase. And as you're aware, we're not at that point yet. Yep.
But when we do, and that is the end stage of the process, there's precedent. There's precedent in this council, because when we took land from the District Council of Manapara in 84-85, that's exactly what happened. So many staff came, so many trucks and bulldozers came. So there's lots of precedent, albeit now it's quite dated, about how that division can occur. So when we get to that stage and the Commissioner asks, we can even look back to see what's happened in the past. So it's not insurmountable.
And just to add to the comment about the cost of the investigative stage, it does have to cover a lot of that detail, what staff movements would have to occur, all those sorts of things. And our proposal is extremely complex. A lot of other proposals might have only been one council boundary moving and affecting one other council, those sorts of things, whereas we're, affecting a number of our neighbours at the same time. So rather than just having to work with one council on an investigation, the investigation's having to work with 4 councils. So that's a costly exercise to get all 4 councils giving the same information in the same sort of format, etc., etc.
I guess I do understand that it's a complicated process. It does feel somewhat like we're funding the research and development of the Boundaries Commission. I feel like a lot of this stuff is not, we didn't invent the idea of boundaries in 2017. It feels like there should be there's some questions we've been asking the whole time that they're still unsure about, that I feel like it's, just frustrating.
Okay, so our proposal, this basically was brought to the fore by a motion on notice from the Mayor back on 28th of May 2019. So as David said, it's been in our strategic documents for a number of years, and it wasn't until this legislation occurred that we had the opportunity to step forward. So September 2019, the Council resolved at a special meeting to continue to investigate the boundary reform, adopting in principle the following areas that are on the screen there, to either be included or removed from the town of Gawler. So they're the ones. Noting that the area of Roseworthy was considered as part of the deliberations but not included as an area of interest. Because of that clause around that council viability, we're unable to render another council financially unviable through a process, so therefore Roseworthy was not included. In that September resolution, we also had a part of the resolution which authorised the Mayor to write to all of the adjoining councils that were affected by the proposal or possible proposal that might come from that resolution, and seek their cooperation in regards to boundary reform and agreement to the progress discussions in the regards of the best interests of the communities involved. Including seeking their willingness to establish an appropriate cost-sharing arrangement to the investigations that will be triggered by the Commission, etc. So Council did actively contact its neighbours, ask them, look, we think there's some work to do around boundary change. This is what we've come up with so far in our first initial investigations, and that opportunity was provided. Mayor?
I've got another question from Mick. Thank you, Mick. Can we seek state funding as a test case for the investigation, since we are breaking new ground? I don't know if there is a pot of money that we can seek funding for, but are you aware of anything, David or Kirsty?
My understanding is in the Act it actually stipulates that the initiating council is responsible. Yeah. So it's stated within the Act, therefore
So it's actually written into the Act. So we sort of have to pay. Yeah. He's gonna text. He's gonna send me something else. Okay. I don't mind. I'll keep asking you questions. Keep going. Yes, Nathan.
And also, we also discussed this at our regional roundtable as well, Mayor, when we talked about state government funding, any sorts of future realignments or looking at as well, which I think was tabled as a part of our regional discussion where we were tracking on how that looks. So in answer to the question, I don't necessarily think it's off the table per se, but it's, I think...
I think from a boundary reform proposal, it's written into the Act that the council has to pay for it, but what they were talking about was realignments or maybe amalgamations. Now, I've had separate conversations with different councils, Adelaide Plains, Barossa and Light, and they're not interested in amalgamating. So I'm not sure what the funding would be for, but it might be for, shared responsibilities or something like that. Yeah.
Since we started this process, the Guideline 10 has been introduced, I think it was 2021, for the Mount Gambier proposal, where the state government basically said, hey, let's look at these two areas and see if they want to basically join together as one. So that guideline was added. So there was, the possibility of a ministerial proposal now. That may be the funding that they're possibly referring to, but I think that door's not open for us at the moment. But hey, I'll have conversations if people if people think there's money that we can seek. Yeah.
I've got another question for Mick. I think it's more of a statement. The Acts say we pay, it doesn't say we get the money. The state is free to decide to help. Well, yeah, that's a matter of opinion. But yes, I've read it out. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So this is the map that represents the changes. The green areas are the areas that we are seeking as communities of interest to come into Gawler, and the slight little bit of red area down the bottom end there are the areas that we think possibly align better with Playford area. 26th of November, Council resolved to submit a Stage 1 proposal. Basically, we communicated with our neighbouring councils throughout this process as well. So as we were moving through and councils adopted certain motions, etc., we wrote to our neighbours letting them know that council had made this decision and we were progressing to this next stage. So we had those communication lines open at any time if they wanted to come to the table and talk about things. Basically, from those first communications where we said that we were progressing to that Stage 1 proposal, we had Light Regional Council requesting us to withdraw as soon as we were lodging, basically. Adelaide Plains, they've resolved not even to talk about boundary reform. Playford never really engaged, etc. Barossa communicated with us backwards and forwards a little bit around, they weren't supportive of our proposal, etc. There were several items in the Commission's letter to Council that required clarification from the Commission around that proposal that we did submit. And we provided, when we provided that submission, the Boundaries Commission came back to us on the 20th after their 20th of January meeting, where they reviewed the submission and basically provided approval for us to proceed to Stage 2. From that, we had several questions when they said you may want to do certain things, looking at whether parts of our proposal were administrative and could be changed, etc. And that resulted in some of those questions that got that Guideline 3 altered a little bit for us, for future clarity for everybody, for other councils as well. As we went through the process, our neighbouring councils also developed proposals. The Barossa boundary change proposal was actually submitted prior to our council submitting a proposal. Their intent, basically the key focus for the Barossa, was using boundary reform to support the Barossa branding exercise, where they wanted to basically pull in the Barossa GI together a bit more. Not the full GI, but where they considered the Barossa GI should sit with them. In my opinion, it didn't really align. By looking at the branding exercise, it didn't really address that communities of interest and where those connections were for communities. And the Commission wrote back to them and said, basically, you could proceed to the next level, but you're going to have to do a lot of work around the Section 26 principles because we're not really seeing the connection, sort of thing. That's my words.
I might just take a question from Councillor Kosh.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Kirsty, just on that, has the Barossa only paused that?
No, they've done an official withdrawal now. So they decided not to proceed with a resolution back in February 2020. However, it wasn't until this February, 15th February 2023, that they formally withdrew their submission to the Commission. And that was really in the letter that they wrote to the Commission. They did say it was an oversight. They didn't realise they had to formally withdraw. They just thought by not continuing in the process, they would have basically been withdrawn. So, yeah, so they decided back in February 2020 not to proceed. Our other neighbouring councils, Light Regional Council put in a potential proposal as well, so did that Stage 1 submission on the 18th of May. Their proposal had the intent of redistributing the Town of Gawler council area and assets between all the neighbouring councils of Gawler. So that went to the Commission. The Commission replied back to them on the 9th of July, basically that it doesn't easily align with the Section 26 principles. Didn't really address them at all from where I'm sitting, and with the work that we'd done in that space. And basically their general proposal as outlined in the potential proposal could not be referred for consideration, so it kind of stopped it in stage 1 process. It didn't provide any indication of how those communities of interest shared a connection, so where they were saying, you know, the rivers would basically become a boundary for each of the councils that were left. It didn't really show how there was a connection of Williston to Light Regional Council and things like that. It didn't have that depth to it. So basically it didn't progress. So back to our proposal. Council resolved in July 2020 to adopt an updated consultation and communication plan. And basically we did a consultation from the 26th of August to the 7th of October. It was a very comprehensive process. It was well extended. We only have to do 21 days as a requirement. So we did extend it out to make sure that we gave a lot of time for community to read what we had out there, because we knew it was a lot of information to digest, see how it sat with them, see what the community thought about that proposal. So there was lots of different ways that you can see on the screen there of engaging with council and giving us feedback. As I said previously, council was following the process set out in the guidelines, and we were following it so closely that we began this process of basically asking questions back to the commission to say, you know, how do we do this and what exactly do you require from this consultation? Basically, what they came back to us is the Commission's role to consult with the affected communities. Your role is to find out what your community, the current community, not the one in the proposal, but the current community that you serve, what they feel about boundary reform, number 1, and your proposal, number 2. So they were our key things. So we consulted with our residents and ratepayers. We also included anyone from outside the area who wanted to participate as well. So the affected councils also received information about the consultation and were able to put in a submission themselves as well. We didn't exclude anybody. We had a forum, we had 2 forums actually, same forum twice, so that we could accommodate everybody's questions, that basically had representatives come and speak and talk through the commission process as well, so that people got a better idea of boundary reform. I'm just having a quick whiz at my nose to see what I've missed. When talking to the Office of Local Government, they kept reiterating to us to please make sure that we got that local voice and what our community wanted.
So Alex Hart came to
Alex
both
Hart,
of those.
yes.
She works in the Office of Local Government and she's a very seasoned operator and she presented, I think, very well at those forums.
Yep. Okay. So, our proposal, the outcomes, we had the level of engagement shown there on that slide, written submissions, verbal submissions, attendances at the 2 public forums, survey responses, etc. From the survey, 76% of the Gawler community supported boundary reform and the proposal that we were putting forward. For the forums, council engaged URPS, a consultancy firm, to provide the MC and consultancy services to facilitate the public forums, because we felt that made it a very fair process. Made sure that we had someone who was trained in facilitating community forums to really make sure they captured everyone's voice, everyone had an opportunity. The communities of interest were also encouraged to attend and learn what the proposal was all about and provide their feedback. As the Mayor said, Alex Hart from the Office of Local Government attended and spoke to the Commission's process. Mayor Karen Redmond spoke on our proposal, and as did Henry, our CEO, Henry Innett. Council also engaged an independent marketing consultancy to do the survey called Square Holes. They were provided with a scope of works for the task which described the need to ascertain that Gawler residents and ratepayers' voice as the main aim of the survey. And as the consultation was open to all to participate, Square Holes allowed the voice of neighbouring residents and ratepayers to be captured as a secondary layer in that report. the scope was set to meet what the Commission and the guidelines required us to do. So we didn't just put the scope together going, oh, this would be a feel-good way of doing it or whatever. It was actually how the Commission wanted us to be able to tell them what our community's viewpoints were. Square Holes assisted in designing the survey, and then they administered the survey and undertook all the analysis in compliance with ISO 20252. We had enough responses to provide a statistically valid result. A number of responses are up there. It's a higher standard. We set for that survey a higher standard than Council has done for any other surveys that I've been here at Council to perform. I've been here 5 odd years now, so a little while. And we've sort of always done those surveys kind of in-house. We've created them ourselves, but this time we said, no, it has to be very robust. It needs to have people with the skill set who design surveys to actually do this, to make sure that it is fair as possible and gets the true information back from the community that we seek. So, continuing on with the survey results, this result speaks favourably in support of the views and expressed by our Council's proposal. The Gawler community extends beyond Council's current boundaries, with the residents of neighbouring councils identifying themselves as part of Gawler community. So those neighbouring areas there, 38% of the Barossa Council who responded to our survey actually said that they feel more connected to the Gawler community, or members of their household feel more connected to the Gawler community than they do the Barossa areas. So we were just trying to show how people feel, whether they feel part of the community of Gawler or whether they feel part of the community elsewhere. It shows you up there, basically, 38% of respondents from Barossa Council LGA, 27 respondents from Light, 40% of the respondents from Playford indicated, you know, most associated with Gawler community. Further survey results. Now, earlier you saw 76% of Gawler community said, yes, we want boundary reform. This one's 68%. The reason is the difference is because these are the ones who had strong support. So in one of the questions, there was a, I somewhat support the proposal, or I really support the proposal, or yes, we need to do this. So out of the somewhat support, etc., the 76%. The ones who say, yes, we think we really need to do this, 68% of our respondents from the Gawler residents. Okay, so we're really trying to pull that Gawler resident voice out. Okay, so in developing the Stage 2 general proposal, we had to do that high-level analysis we were talking about earlier. We had to show the net change, basically, that Council would have by taking on these new areas. So up there on the screen, it's probably a bit small for people to read back there. We put in the high-level impact of taking on those areas as they currently are now. So Concordia obviously is not developed. So those figures represent as the communities are now, that we were identifying as communities of interest. The affected councils were asked to provide key data to help us be more accurate in that data, but unfortunately they said no, we're not going to provide you anything. They don't have to provide anything. They have to provide the Commission when they request it. They don't have to provide it to us. So we took their data that's publicly available, and we looked at map data, etc., and did the best we could to come out with those figures. So noting the net change, if the proposal's proclaimed in full as the communities are now, not with Concordia developed, that's sort of what we think it would look like, noting it's a few years old now as well, so it will have changed a bit. Council could possibly be impacted by some of those expenses that we're identifying there if we don't go ahead with boundary reform. So, you know, $4,270,000 in new expenditure for communities of interest, variable costs, etc. A portion of that, because we still have to try and maintain our road infrastructure to support those communities that are going to be using our community as their main community or passing through our community to get to work, etc. You know, the Gawler Eastlink Road is a classic example where councils has to invest heavily to support our growing community, but also that's catering for regional growth as well. So we are going to where some of that cost, whether if we don't proceed with boundary reform, we're not going to have any income to offset that against from those communities that are using that infrastructure. Or our community would pay a cost, as in if a community member's got 3 kids and we're going to use the sporting facilities, we're going to be part of the sporting teams. We need to provide regional sporting facilities because we're going to have that neighbourhood use if they're not part of our community. So we're still going to have to provide those sorts of services to make sure that our Gawler residents still have enough access or our sporting facilities have capacity to support our Gawler residents plus the extra people. Because there's not, if you're going to go join a footy club, it's not a case of, well, where's your council rates notice? Let us show what community you're in. Oh, yes, you can join Wollaston Football Club. It's come and join. Let's everyone come in. It's fantastic. So we're still going to wear some of that.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Kirsty, I have a question from Councillor
Yeah,
Frosch.
it's just a statement. If you look on the William Lakes website, they actually identify with Gawler as if they're part of Gawler.
Mm-hmm.
They're already saying that. So that's just an example of what a small development is doing. Can you consider what's going to happen with Concordia?
I've got another question from Mick Braun. What percentage of the 4.27 million would Town of Gawler have to spend anyway without border change? Because there is a sense that you would have to spend money anyway. And I think you covered off on providing services for other people.
I couldn't give you a dollar figure, and it will depend how quickly those neighbouring areas develop as well as to how quickly council needs to invest in those sorts of things. So any of that is just, unable to be determined fully, which is really frustrating. It'd be really nice to be able to say, if we don't do it, it's going to cost us this. If we do it, it's going to cost us that. It'd be great to have that comparison, but I'm afraid we just can't provide it.
I'll go to Helen Hennessy and then Nathan Shanks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just following up on the comment that Councillor Koch said. I think language is really important in this, and I thank the staff for putting together that accumulation of historic documents that go back to 2019. But I did notice in that the Light Council actually describes its townships of Freeling and Greenock and so on, but the suburb of Hewitt. And I think when you see that type of language, whether they realise it or not, they are actually describing it as a suburb of Gawler. So I think how people use the language is going to be quite telling in this.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned sporting precincts. As you know, Town of Gawler, I think you touched on regional hub. We support a lot of people. What's the economical benefit of having such a strong sporting community in our town? Our local council, what do we benefit from by having these assets local to our council area, opposed to just over the border?
Mm-hmm. Well, that again is a very complex question. Can't give you dollar figures on that sort of thing. I mean, community-wise, it's so fantastic to have your community coming together. The social outcomes, I would say, outweigh financial benefit or etc. But also you do have those people who come in on the weekend, they do their shopping, then they go to the footy match or they go to tennis, etc. So economically it is good for the town to have those regional facilities, but also, you know, that fitness and wellbeing is such a big thing as well. So putting just an actual cost and a dollar benefit is just such a small part of the story, but we still can't exactly, I mean, Bryce may be able to crunch some numbers and give us some...
I've got a question. Oh, Bryce.
Sorry.
You want to speak, Bryce? Hello.
Happy to be involved. So a figure that is quoted quite often is $1 invested provides $7 of community benefit. That is a very broad, so it does talk, as Kirsty talked about, from an economic perspective, but a significant component of that is health and wellbeing. So that is things about preventative health, all of those sorts of things there. So a lot of those things out of that $7 are actually linked to individuals and people, but there is a component that would be linked to the economic and the community part of that as well.
You also have to invest in those structures, and if you don't invest in those structures, and we're being lobbied by the sporting clubs, and rightly so, to invest. So it does come back. It does come back to council to provide an investment of money. Now I've got a question from Rosa. Rosa's asking where the survey were the surveys given specifically to people in the proposed boundary areas? I think it was a general survey, but I'll ask you regarding surveys outside of Gawler.
So the survey was...
Did I get that right? Did I get that right? Okay, thank you.
The survey was provided on our website, so anybody from anywhere could log in and do a survey. There were hard copies available at all council sites and buildings. We put notices in the paper about how to access the survey, how to get involved in the engagement. They were available when we had the public forums where people attended. They could fill in a survey while they were there on iPads. So there was lots of different ways that people could access that survey.
So you could have written it from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It was an honour system.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like any survey, you know, you trust people to try and do the right thing, and not have, you know, one person filling 5 surveys type of thing. But that could have happened in any survey from any side.
Councillor Hughes?
So, yeah.
Did you have a question? No, you. Okay, thank you. I saw your hand up. Oh, it was a while ago. Sorry.
So have we had an indication from the Boundaries Commission about what the most, I guess, important questions are in regards to what the community wants? Because I guess because I can ask 2 different questions about boundary reform and get about a 50% difference in that. If we ask people in Hewitt, for example, what, you know, community do you consider yourself closest to, and the options were, you know, Gawler and, you know, Kapunda and, you know, Nurippa, like, I think that would have a pretty strong Gawler thing. But if you ask them, would you like your rates to go up in a metropolitan council, suddenly which is the question that a lot of people are answering when they answer the survey, that suddenly becomes a very strong no. And, you know, so I guess that my question is around, you know, when they're looking at this, are they looking at, do the community members think this is their community of interest, or are they looking at, do the community members, you know, want it just on a more general scale? Because I feel like there's a huge difference when you ask those 2 questions. You
can freeze rates for a particular part of town. You can do that.
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked about
I'm not.
last night.
I guess I should clarify. That's not a statement of fact that the rates will go up, but that is that was the campaign at the time.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And there was a financial analysis done by the finance team of the town of Gawler, which showed Gawler, on average, the average rate was less than Light Regional Council. That was done in 2022. Yeah, so if you want to dig that out and share that gives a really interesting average rate. It was quite interesting. Councillor Solomon, you had your hand up.
I was just thinking in the 2 particular areas which we're talking about being Hewitt and Concordia. I imagine Hewitt as an established suburb would be very different from the rate that would be payable in Concordia. I mean, were those figures calculated based on those 2 areas, or just generally across the township?
The rate.
The average.
We've got rates comparisons coming.
Are you talking about financial impact, or are you talking about rates?
You mentioned the general rate across the general rate.
Yeah,
was
financial
lower.
Analysis,
Yeah.
Average rate,
average
our rate
rate,
was actually under Light Regional.
Obviously, it varies across it varies depending
It
on the growth.
It depends on how much your house is worth.
Yes, yeah, no, obviously
Yeah.
valuation growth areas would be increasing, I imagine, and pay a higher rate because valuations would be going up as opposed to, you know, established suburbs.
You can adjust rates in the dollars you can do that. Councils are able to do that. I'm pretty sure that is the case.
So in
David?
terms of rates comparisons, we've got those details in further slides through the presentation, so we'll get to that as we go. In direct response to Councillor Davies in terms of what the Commission was seeking, so the Commission's seeking and the guidelines and principles of boundary change proposals is all about communities of interest. In a nutshell, when discussions, and I believe it was even questions at the public forums we had that Alex Hart was at, rating is not a criteria that they're considering.
No.
Because it's about communities of interest is the whole ethos behind the proposal.
It's about where communities sit in relation to each other. So I think that's their main focus. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions at this stage? Yep.
I guess just with some context, I've been looking, I've been going back a bit further than even the beginning as presented here, back to the 1985 boundary changes, which is when Gawler last changed its boundaries. And I was looking at the responses to how people reacted to it. So, because Gawler brought in the Evanston suburbs, so all the suburbs named Evanston and, Cudler, Hillier, that area was part of the Manapara Council. They wanted to move. There was a strong community support for the move. And Gawler also brought in parts of Williston and parts of Gawler East that were in Light and Barossa Council respectively. And those people didn't so much want to move because there was a strong thought that the rates would go up by 10 times, etc., because they were moving from a rural council into a metropolitan council and their rates would change and that kind of thing. I just thought that was an interesting comparison to, I think there is an aspect to the concept of moving from one metropolitan area to another conceptually, I think is different in people's minds from moving from a regional area to a metropolitan area, and it's sort of associated with, rates and a bunch of other things. So just a bit of historical context.
So continuing on with that proposal, Council considered the final draft of the Stage 2 general proposal and basically resolved to submit it on the 15th of December 2020. The Commission then sought further information after we'd submitted our proposal to them. We submitted it on the 23rd of December, just before Christmas. Got it done. So basically the Commission sought information on the updated financial analysis, further predicted advantages and disadvantages of the impacts of the proposal. So we'd in our proposal, we'd addressed advantages and disadvantages to the affected communities that we could see, and also the impacts on our council, because we could guess what that might look like. But they came back to us and said, okay, so now can you do advantages and disadvantages for Barossa Council, Light Council, Playford Council as well? So that was the information they sought. And also they wanted further information on the impact of representation for each of the affected councils as well. So if our boundary proposal was going to significantly impact a council where suddenly, they'd had 3 representatives in an area and we were taking on that area, does that upset the balance of their elected body? So we had to kind of provide information around that as well.
So this is where the rating analysis comes in, but before that, Deputy Mayor, you've got a question?
Yep, sure.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Just on the previous slide, hypothetically, just say boundary reform went, the way, and we picked up Concordia, Hewitt, all that. So we turned from a 26,000 population up to a 50,000 population. Is that the sort of threshold that you'd be looking at ward structures then?
There was talk about. I know Councillor Little was keen on bringing back wards, and that's a separate body of work. That's a representation review, and I don't think that the Commission will be delving into that in great detail. However, a representation review does, and you know, there is an argument to say if you're going up to 50,000 and you're doubling your area, would you go back to wards? And that's a serious question that you would have to be considered.
Well, just out of interest, like I just wonder, is there any thresholds that get met? You know, a geographic footprint of or is it a population, or is it just a decision?
No, we will go through a representation review. You have to do it every council term, and
which I think we've done already, haven't we? Yeah.
Currently, we're area councillors because we're 42 square kilometres, and it's, you know, and previously, some people. You don't have to live in a ward to actually represent the ward, and some people just got in because there was nobody representing a ward. However, I think it is a serious consideration that we consider if it gets to that stage. I'll go to Councillor Hennessy and then Councillor Koch.
It's actually our community, and our community has rejected it since about I think the early 90s. Every time the question review, the community comes back because that's who gets to vote on it.
I know.
And they don't. Yeah. So it's not the chamber, it's the community.
I know. But if we doubled in size, it's a different scenario because there's different people coming into the equation. So I don't know what the answer to that question might be. It is up to the community to provide that feedback. Yeah. Absolutely.
If I could just...
Councillor Koch, sorry?
Could I just add something? I do believe, and I'm not an expert in this because I'm not governance, but I do believe that representation review can be triggered as well, so that doubling of our population is probably, and I'm not an expert, would trigger that representation review anyway. So whereas we might be scheduled to do it in like 3 years' time now, I think, we'd be scheduled to do it. If suddenly boundary reform came through and we were going to have that doubling of population,
I think you're right.
Then it would trigger an earlier review than what's scheduled. So that's my understanding.
When you double in size, and it might not be doubled in size at that point, but it might eventually get to double in size. There's many different people coming to live here, so their views are also important. So I think it would be triggering. Do you have any comment, CEO? No. Okay. Councillor Koch, sorry.
The interesting thing about representation is that, for example, if Concordia is in the Barossa and they was fully fledged, the majority of elected members would come from Concordia, in effect, and you can forget the rest of the Barossa because they'll be focused on Concordia. It's actually happening in Adelaide Plains already. You've got more representation in Two Wells. And I've spoken to some people, some councillors in Adelaide Plains, and they're quite concerned that it's actually becoming more urban, their council, than rural. So eventually they won't have very many rural representatives as councillors compared to town people. Yeah. So I think the Barossa should be very, very careful about, where they're going to end up if, they're going to have the majority. They forget about the Barons of Barossa because the people down in Concordia aren't going to be concerned about that. The people up at the people out at Mount Pleasant, Eden Valley, they won't get a look in.
It is a really interesting question about representation and what people think. And when you double in size, it's a really interesting question. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So I think we'll all watch with interest over time. Well, that's a matter for the Barossa Council. So we'll keep moving, I think. I don't think there's any other questions at this stage.
Councillor Hughes, did you have a question you still wanted to ask?
Did you have a question?
No, you're right.
No? Okay. I did see your hand up before, David.
So in terms of the Stage 2 proposal that was submitted adopted to be submitted at the 15 December 2020 Council meeting, this was the rating comparison within that report. So the average residential rates for Gawler 1618, 63, and then you can see the others alongside it. So then that was 1920, and then the 1920 variance is in blue below. So as you can see at the time, there was small variances in some and slightly larger in others. But in 2021, those variances shortened with actually Playford being over and above Gawler at that point in time. As part of the additional information process that the Commission requested after our submission, we had to update all of our financials. So we had to reiterate the financial model that we had and look at the indicative financial impact on the operating result for all of the affected councils as part of that proposal. Please note this is very high level and indicative. Accurate and reliable financial analysis could only be undertaken with the provision of appropriate financial data from the affected councils, which they weren't willing to provide to us. So we were only able to do it on publicly available information at the time. And that table shows what those financial impacts were going to be. Proposed to occur, that is. In terms of the residential rate analysis changes, the 2021 table on the next page shows the change in residential rates, average residential rate from the councils, affected councils. Unfortunately, at the time that this submission happened in 27 July, City of Playford hadn't released its data yet for that financial year, so we had to use the previous year's data. But as you can see, it's shortening still through that process. And then more recently, we've, through financial reporting and through our budget processes, we've had rating comparisons for the 22-23 average residential valuations and rates for the affected areas. And as you can see, the variance to Gawler is now single, sort of very low numbers in terms of only $12 for Barossa, 34 for Light and 60 for Playford in 22-23. So as time has progressed, the differences and variances have shortened with our neighbouring affected councils. I'll hand back to Kirsty.
Council also had to address the viability issue of other councils affected by the proposal. So we looked at the indicative impact on the number of rateable allotments. So that's what this slide explains here. It's worth noting Light Regional Council there has a very small number of allotments in comparison to the other councils. But whilst there's no definitive guideline as to what represents a financially sustainable council relative to the number of rateable allotments, 25 of the current 68 councils in Australia have less than 6,800 rateable allotments. So that's about 37% of South Australian councils. So basically, these councils are predominantly, very small rural councils, but do include places like Adelaide Plains Council, which is a growth council, and also include town of Walkerville, which is a small council in the middle of the city. So continuing on our journey, 10th November 2021, the Commission advised in writing that our general proposal had been assessed and that it met the requirements under Guideline 3 of submitting a general proposal and generally aligned with the Section 26 principles from the Act. The Commission therefore determined that we can proceed to the next stage, which is the inquiry. And they also, in the letter, provided some indicative timing around the provision of a cost estimate to us as the initiating council and undertaking the inquiry investigation being split to several months prior to the 2022 council elections and then the community consultation occurring after the elections were completed. That was their, best guess at what they could do. Section 32B of the Local Government Act 1999 obligates the initiating council to fund that investigation as part of the boundary reform process, and it states that clause, it says basically that the Commission may recover reasonable costs of an inquiry into a general proposal from the initiating council. All affected councils were provided notification that we were able to proceed. Council provided a response to the Commission on the 31st of January 2022, advising that because they'd taken feedback from the other councils, they changed that initial idea of when they could deliver that investigation, and they said that they would basically delay it until after the council elections occurred. So Town of Gawler basically wrote to them advising disappointment in the chosen timing because basically it meant that our funding allocation for that year would not be able to be used. It would mean that we'd have to be resourcing it in the following financial year instead. as well as voicing concerns about the loss of momentum as well, because there was a significant time delay due to that. The Commission considered that information and came back to us with our estimate on the 26th of April 2022. They sought, Council basically, in that situation, under the process that was in place, Council were advised that we would give you the cost estimate. It would include a 15% contingency amount in there for any unforeseen things that the Commission hadn't possibly thought of that needed to be included during the investigation. But basically under the process there was no lock-in for what that cost would be. So if Council said yes, we'd proceed, they could then go to procurement and come back, and if the quotes, the tenders actually came back at $700,000, then they could proceed, and Council had said yes, and we would then have to foot whatever that bill was. So Council basically saw increased legal protection and wrote back to the Commission and said that, you know, we want to have better certainty for Council, and we don't do procurement that way ourselves, so we want to have that guard in there for Council. And the Mayor and Henry both met with the Chair of the Commission to discuss that issue, and the Commission then advised basically that it agreed to accept Council's request to have that right of refusal if it comes back as a cost higher than the cost estimate we've been provided. There was a bit of back and forth on that, I've got to say. they weren't really going to capitulate, but no, I think they saw sense, and you know, we put the argument forward that other councils also need that protection if councils are going to proceed. Small community councils, etc., wouldn't be able to, you know, proceed with no cap. So the Commission then came back to us, providing us with updated timelines, and they gave us a time frame asking for a response from Council to say that we would accept that new that legal protection and move forward with boundary reform by the 17th of August, which is a time frame that didn't allow us to present back to an ordinary meeting of Council. So we asked for a short extension to the 23rd of August Council meeting to be able to respond. And at that meeting, Council resolved to proceed and advised the Commission that with that protection in place, we would proceed to that investigation inquiry. The Commission went out to market with a tender on the 21st of March this year, closed on the 21st of March this year, sorry, went out in February. And we're yet to be advised of any particular outcome of the assessment of the tenders that have been received. Council then resolved on the 27th of June 2023 to move the budget allowance that had been made in the budget, the draft budget documents, I should say, of $379,500 for boundary reform to put it below the line for the financial year of 23-24.
Deputy Mayor.
So, I mean, obviously the tender closed a while ago now. I know I asked the question on without notice the other night, but have we got any indicative time on when we actually might see a verification of what we allocated however long ago now, or what it actually might be, or... Yeah. And also, when did they find out the resolution in regard to moving it below the line as well? You know, how was that passed on?
Well, as I mentioned at the last council meeting, I, out of frustration, again rang Alex Hart to see where things were at, which was, you know, one of many phone calls over the last sort of 3 months or so, and she mentioned that the matter was being presented to the next meeting of the Commission.
Which is this week?
Which was this week, as I understand. Yeah. I think it might be Friday of this week, or Thursday, Friday. And to which I've previously advised Alex of Council's motion to put the money below the line. I impressed upon her that, you know, that's not a rescission motion, it's not a decision to, you know, not proceed with boundary reform, but, you know, it's material in terms of, you know, the funding allocation. And, you know, she was certainly going to bring that to the attention of the Commission, and that that would be in the mix relative to what, and you know, what they would then communicate back to council. But I'm hopeful that we get some correspondence next week.
Mayor, if I can, and it's not for this at this place, but I think we need, as a council, to address the unconscionable delay. I think reading back through, you know, nearly 4 years now, progress has been made in a calm and stable way, and it seems to me since August of last year things have just completely disappeared, and I think that's disrespectful to this council, who have striven to meet the requirements of the Boundary Commission, and I'd be most interested to have some representation from them as to what on earth is happening.
Well, we could arrange another meeting with the chair. Who's the chair currently?
Robinson.
Who's the chair currently?
I haven't been advised that it's a change, so it's
Is it Bruce Green still?
No, Bruce is gone.
He's gone.
Donaldson. Rob Donaldson. That's it.
Rob Donaldson. Oh, okay. We've met with him previously, so we could arrange another meeting. And they won't come. Yeah, we can arrange a meeting to have with the chair and find out the outcome of the discussions. I think that might be useful, Deputy Mayor. Actually, David had his hand up before you. David?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. There was a lot of consultation that we did earlier, a lot of staff time. I think what's happening is it may mean that we have to start all over again as well. It's just really frustrating.
It is frustrating, and I'm a bit concerned that we have to start from scratch again. If that happens, I think that would be very disappointing. We will. There's no rescission motion that we stop boundary reform, but if that comes and that is passed, then we have to let the Boundaries Commission know, because then it will stop. It will stop, and currently it's paused, but we don't have the money to do anything in boundary reform. So I'm not sure how we proceed. Well, we'll wait and see what happens next year, but I think that they may expect us to do it all again, and that is would be quite disappointing, because we've done a lot of work. Councillor Solomon?
So just to be clear, so what was said there is that we may have to start again because of an error, which was the Boundary Commission's error and the Boundary Commission's error alone. Is that,
well,
is that not
I'm
legally
not
enforceable?
suggesting that the Boundaries Commission has. I didn't say that there was an error. I didn't mention that at all.
Not error, a lack of. I mean, a lack of ability to proceed with it is the Boundary Commission's fault.
It really is a matter. It really is a matter for the Boundaries Commission and what their view is on us stopping the process, which we effectively have by not having money to pay for the investigation. So it really is their call. It is their call to decide whether we start again. I don't know what the answer to that is, Councillor Solomon. We will certainly argue that we shouldn't do that because we've done a lot of work. It's been a lot of work. And yet, as you can see, the staff have worked very hard. I'd like to thank Kirsty and David for your efforts, and also Tara Sheila-Beer. She did a lot of work early on. So I think that there has been a lot of work by staff looking at this very serious proposal. We've worked through the guidelines. We've addressed the guidelines, and I think that is to our staff's and the council's benefit. But I think, maybe there is an opportunity, Henry, to have a discussion with the chair to just find out where we're at.
Yeah, I guess the question I was going to ask was around what the threshold for restarting that is, and if that is looking like something that's going to happen, that's reported to council.
Sorry?
The threshold for starting again in terms of time
Well,
frame.
we would ask them. We would ask that direct question to them, and ask their view. Now they might send us a letter. That's usually what they do.
Yes.
They might give us an answer to that question straight away, but I doubt whether they will. They might actually present it. They're very slow.
Yes.
This has been exceptionally slow. This was raised by Adelaide Hills Council, by the slowness of these proposals and how they go over 2 council terms, which really is quite tricky. Campbelltown have gone over 2 council terms, but they're right behind their boundary reform proposal, so a bit different to what we're sitting here. But I think that I'm more than happy to have a conversation with the chair and see where it goes.
That would be good. I think it would be good to have a sound answer to that rather than anything that's sort of speculative.
Yeah.
And if it is an issue with the fact that they've stretched it out for too long, then there's some legal recourse there.
Well, the question I'm going to ask is, you've gone out for procurement in March. You've completed the procurement, surely. It wouldn't have stretched on for 4 months. What's the outcome? Why haven't you advised us? Why are you sitting on the number? It really is, and Gawler's in a really tricky spot. We're surrounded by growth. We'll be impacted by that growth, and I think that the questions do need to be asked. So I'm more than happy to ask those questions.
Thank you,
Councillor Davies.
Yeah, and also just with costs, it would be great to get a split of costs, because there is something that's I've been frustrated by throughout is just wanting to understand because we have essentially 3 proposals that we've made into one proposal. Maybe we should have launched it as 3 separate proposals, but one of those proposals, for example, the Playford one, they lose a net 20 houses. It's some cleaning up around.
It's administrative.
It's administrative. They have part of Evanston Park or whatever.
Yeah.
There would be no reason to stop that process. I'm sure. I mean, consultation for 20 houses, I can do that in an afternoon for them. It surely can't be that expensive.
I'll put that to the chair.
It would just be because we've got a proposal with Hewitt that's the biggest one in terms of number of houses affected. The Concordia one has a future effect, but is currently about 200 houses, and the Playford one is about 20 houses, and it's just like, for some reason, a fifth of Hillier or whatever is in the Playford Council kind of stuff. So I feel like there's a lot that we could do that maybe I don't know could have been done years ago at this point.
We did pose the question to the chair and staff when we had a previous meeting with them, and said we could split. They wouldn't allow us to do that. We'd have to start all over again. So we chose to keep it together because if we split it, we'd have to start again, and there's another 4 years gone.
Mayor, I was just thinking perhaps in your discussions with the chair you could explain that the problem has become that our community is asking questions and we're in a position that we're unable to tell them, and it's leading to some frustration because of this long and drawn out process which seems to be going nowhere.
Well, we have raised that before. I've raised that to the chair and said that it's taking way too long. You should be more efficient with your processes, and they sort of didn't like that. So, but you have to be direct, yet respectful. And I'm always respectful, so you have to choose your words wisely. But you don't want to upset the Boundaries Commission too much. You need to be engaging and you need to be diplomatic. So I think that I'm up for that conversation. Yeah, I think we need to do that. But thank you, David.
It's quite okay. Final slide for us. In terms of the pursuit of boundary change, just wanted to make it clear that there have been significant costs in staff time funded through our recurrent budget related to employee costs to work through this process, as is evidenced by the body of work that members would have seen in all the reporting and proposals and submissions. The Council did allocate a nominal sum of $20,000 within 2021 adopted budget for the progression to stage 2. The costs outwards, other than staffing costs that the proposals had, there's a total 11,546.67, broken down into those 6,000 for design of the survey and square holes to undertake it, 4,425 for URPS to facilitate the forums, and 1,121.67 for advertising, catering and other sundry. So in terms of non-staff expense, it's actually been a quite lean cost exercise. I just wanted to clear that up because there have been some community voices saying that this has cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars outwards already. So I just wanted to tidy that one up.
I have a comment from Mick Braun. Surely the Commission has a statutory, fiduciary and common law duty of care in its deliberations. Absolutely, absolutely. So we will put that to them. Yes. It is frustrating. It is very, very frustrating, and I feel the frustration. I feel the frustration of the community because people come up to me and ask what's happening with boundary reform, and I'm not able to give them much information because we're not getting much from the Boundaries Commission, and so we need to find out, and I'm more than happy to do that. So.
Unfortunately, yes. in the space or in the absence of other information, we do have misinformation running around, and that's really disappointing because we're not we choose not to engage in that. But there's some really wrong, as David has said, there's some wrong information being spread around, which is not helpful.
Okay, how are we going? Questions. We've had lots of questions. We've had lots of questions from the community gallery. Thank you very much for those questions. Any other questions at this stage? I think we've gone through many questions. I'd just like to thank both yourself, Kirsty, and David for all the work that you've put through. And I think there is a large body of work on the hub. There's a lot of work that's gone into this presentation. I'd just like to thank you for all of that hard work. It is a complex. We've probably got the most complex boundary reform proposal in South Australia, but that's because of where Gawler sits, and I think that it is a worthy proposal. However, we'll see where it goes. So if there's no further discussion. Yes?
Mayor, could this be put into the public? You've said this will go into the hub for elected members. Is there a possibility this could be made available to the public in some way?
Well, I don't think anything in here is confidential. I think
no, there's nothing confidential. It's all public agenda report. So we'll load it to the boundary reform proposal page on our website.
Boundary reform page.
We have a page.
We'll load this up. Some of this data is old. Some of it's 2020, 2021. So you might need to put that into context. Okay. All right. I think I might close the workshop. Thank everyone for coming along. Thank you.